She is a physician scientist at the Wellman Center for Photomedicine. She's a board certified dermatologist and a faculty member at Harvard Medical School, Department of Dermatology. Lilit has pioneered injectable cooling devices for mostly aesthetic applications, and some of them have actually been licensed to venture-funded companies. And she's the co-founder of 2 startup companies. Today, Lilit is going to talk about the Magic Wand initiative and the virtual Magic Wand programs. She's the co-founder together with Rox Anderson and current director of the Magic Wand initiative. And that's going to be a big topic of our discussion today. Lilit also does a lot of humanitarian activities. She's pioneered sustainable medical clinics in Armenia. And she also recently founded a nonprofit organization called Face of Angel. And Lilit actually did attend, her BS degree was from UCLA. So Lilit, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us today. And we look forward to hearing about the Magic Wand program.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here today. I want to thank Dr. Milner and the Beckman Institute for the invitation. I'm really excited to share what I know about operationalizing innovation, since we've done it with the Magic Wand program. And I will also share some advice on how you could efficiently do this in your institution. So these are my disclosures. Now, the objective for today is to describe the importance of innovation in healthcare, identify some common barriers, and how you could overcome those to start a successful innovation program, and how to develop strategies that you as an institution could use to implement innovation. Now, before I start, I do want to give you a little bit of background about myself, because it's relevant to what I'm going to talk about. So I originally came to US from Armenia at age 12 as an immigrant. I didn't speak a word in English, nor did my family, and we started our life in 1991 in Glendale, California, actually in a 600 square foot apartment. And growing up from a socioeconomically disadvantaged background. I'm sorry, this is a phone. I'm gonna just hang up. There were a lot of challenges that I had to overcome to get the opportunity to go to UCLA. I graduated from UCLA and got a full scholarship to go to Harvard for my combined MD and PhD degrees, after which I joined the Harvard Dermatology residency program, which is where my journey in innovation started. And now I'm a faculty at the medical school and a physician scientist at the Wellman Center for Medicine. And what I want to tell you today is, how did my journey start in innovation? Despite the fact that I didn't come from the typical background that people think of when they think of innovators. So my journey really started in 2011 at Harvard Medical School, where I was a second-year dermatology resident. So at that time, I had never met Dr. Rox Anderson, but he was invited to give one of the invited lectures, and he spoke about this new invention from his lab shown here, which was cryolipolysis. He said it was a very safe and novel, non-invasive fat removal technology, which worked by sucking in the unwanted fat, here's the abdomen, and cooling it between 2 plates for about an hour. And in 2 months, the fat was gone. So it was a very safe procedure and patients loved it. But one of the most common side effects, he said, which was completely reversible, was this long-lasting loss of sensation in the treated area. And when I first heard this, I was very intrigued by this because he said this numbness lasts for up to 6 to 8 weeks. And being a dermatology resident and a clinician, I knew that cutaneous pain and itch were unmet needs and that we didn't have great therapies for it. So I thought to myself, wow, if we could figure out how this topical non-invasive cooling is affecting the nerves to induce this loss of sensation, maybe we could design and make a new therapy where we could use cooling to target cutaneous nerves only and develop a novel treatment for pain and itch. So I approached Rox after his lecture to discuss this idea, and he told me that no one was really working on this, and he didn't know how the nerves are being affected by cooling, but I'm welcome to join his lab and figure it out. But the caveat was that no one in his lab was studying nerves. And at that time, I was also not an expert on nerves, as my PhD from Harvard was in immunology, and I not have really an in-depth knowledge of engineering or physics, which is what his lab is really known for. But despite all that, I felt really passionate about this problem and wanting to find better treatment. So I joined his lab and I started working on this problem. And what I did is I started an investigator-initiated clinical trial to try to understand how this topical cooling is affecting the nerves. And that entailed learning and performing quantitative sensory studies before and at various points after the treatment. I also did some skin biopsies from these patients before the treatment and at various points after the treatment to quantify the cutaneous nerves in the skin to see how cooling was affecting them. And this image here is from the publication that we published in 2015, sort of summarizing all the results from these findings. This is a biopsy that was stained with PGP 9.5 and myelin basic protein for us to quantitate the sensory fibers within the skin. And just to summarize, all the findings from this paper, which you're welcome to read, by the way, here's the reference, is that we found from this study that topical cooling leads to significant and long-lasting but completely reversible loss of sensation, including pain. And the conclusion was that this can potentially be used to target nerves as a long-term treatment for potentially pain and itch. Now, from an unexpected finding from this study, which I don't have time to get into, we went on to invent and develop this injectable eye slurry that is better than topical cooling. The eye slurry, which I've shown here, we're injecting it through standard needle, can be injected directly into target tissue, and therefore it leads to more efficient and effective tissue cooling. In addition, because it takes less than a minute to inject the slurry directly into target tissue, it's a more time-efficient procedure. But the best part about this invention is that it really is a platform technology, which means that it has multiple other applications, as I've shown you here. So our team has completed many scientific work, which we've published to show the value of this platform technology for multiple therapeutic applications. You could find and read some of these papers here. I don't have the time to get into it, but the reason I'm telling you this story is that the outcomes so far from all this work of one clinician being empowered and encouraged and supported to follow a passion of understanding an unmet need and working on developing a technology has led to 8 provisional and issued patents, over $5.2 million in grant funding from Department of Defense and from NIH, and 3 startup biotechnology companies. But most importantly, it has led to the creation of an actual platform technology that can be used to help patients. Remember when I took on this journey, I really knew nothing about innovation. Terms like IP, licensing, they were really foreign language to me. But because someone like Dr. Rox Anderson really encouraged, empowered, and supported me, I was able to do this and accomplish so much. And this experience has led me to believe that anyone, could become an innovator, anyone could succeed in innovation if they're put into an environment where they could be taught, educated about the process, be supported and encouraged to participate and make a meaningful contribution. And this is why I'm passionate about teaching this. And I started this program called Magic One, which we will get into later. But first, what I want to do is kind of define some terms, such as innovation. What exactly is innovation? We see this term being used a lot, especially lately. In my opinion, and from what is in the literature, innovation really is a new idea or device or a method that's used to solve a problem. It's something that adds value to the world. It expands on an already existing idea, such as invention. So oftentimes people think that innovation is the same as invention, but that is not really the case, right? From my example, ice or slushy existed before, right? But no one had thought of making it injectable and using it to selectively target lipid-rich tissue in the body for therapeutic applications. So that is the innovation. It's not the ice slurry itself, but using that to actually create or solve a problem and bring it to the patients. So that's what differentiates invention from innovation. Now, innovation in healthcare, it's important to know that it could come in many different forms. It doesn't have to be a drug or a new technology. It could be a novel healthcare practice. It could be a workflow efficiency. It could be healthcare delivery and access. So I want you to understand, although I'm talking mainly about devices today, because that's what I focus on, it doesn't mean that's the only way that one could bring innovation in healthcare. Now, why innovate, right? That's a really important question that every innovator has to ask. In healthcare specifically, I think there's a huge unmet need to innovate. And was this really good article published by McKinsey, which tried to really answer this question. In essence, the healthcare system has really faced crisis during the pandemic. And during crisis, you have to make choices and you have to change rapidly to survive and thrive, right? And having an innovation process or a system in place with the capacity to efficiently and effectively identify and solve problems, either as an individual or as an organization, is really critical for effective response. Like, you can't learn how to innovate or develop a system while you're in the crisis. You need to have something in place. And you need an innovation system ahead of time so you could utilize it to solve problems while you're in the crisis. This is why, again, I'm such a huge advocate for teaching and giving healthcare workers a framework of how to innovate, which they could use anytime they come across problems and they know what they need to do to solve them. So the Magic One initiative was started to really teach this to healthcare workers. And again, I will talk to you about this more in the coming slides. But innovation in healthcare could really be used to drive economic growth by improving efficiency and by increasing productivity, and also by optimizing patient outcomes. So that's the reason why I think we should all care about innovating. Now, healthcare workers, which includes really anyone who comes into contact with patients, do play a very unique role in innovation. And the reason is that they're faced with problems daily related to patient care. They live with those problems, right? They know them well. And honestly, after doing this program for years now, I could tell you that they're very good at defining the unmet needs. And the first and the most important step of solving any problem is to identify the problem correctly. And I truly believe that healthcare workers could do this very well. In addition, healthcare workers are the end users of any solution that's made to solve that specific problem, so they can mold and modify them in such a way that it could fit into the medical care system effectively. So healthcare workers do have a special role to play when it comes to healthcare innovation and entrepreneurism. But we all know that the number of healthcare workers involved in this process is pretty low, especially when it comes to women. And the reason for that is that they're well-known barriers. And this is something that we've published about as well, but you could read multiple publications from other journals and authors to find out that the three major barriers are: number one, lack of understanding the process of innovation. If you don't know the process, you're not going to participate. Number two is lack of time. So everyone is busy, especially clinicians. We don't typically get protected time as a healthcare worker to engage in innovation or to solve unmet needs. And number three, most of us don't have access to the tools and know-how that is needed to solve a problem once you've identified the problems. So I really do think that any healthcare center or institute, such as the Beckman, wanting to engage more people in innovation, has to address these barriers. And I'm going to give you some tools and action items of how this can be done effectively. Now, I want you to also think of it this way, right? I know Beckman is more of a research institute, so there's a lot of researchers here. You were taught to use the scientific method, which is a process that you use daily to do science, right? So similar to innovation, similar to the scientific method, innovation has a process. And I think the first strategy and advice that I want to give you as a center is that you really need to develop some sort of educational program to teach the people that you want involved in innovation about the process. Here I've kind of tried to outline the process of biomedical innovation, which is complex, but definitely learnable. I've tried to break them down into technical stream and financial stream, but both of those streams have to happen together in a stepwise manner for innovation to be successful. As you could see, there are a lot of steps, right, which starts from identifying the unmet need, making an invention, protecting that idea, and then doing some of the early development, clinical work, late development, regulatory approval, and commercialization. And all the steps will require some sort of financial support for this to go forward. So this sometimes could look daunting for someone who's never done this before. I mean, it did to me when I just started doing this. And by the way, I went through medical school, residency, and in none of those educational systems did I learn about this process. It wasn't until I joined Rox's lab, the Wellman Center for Photomedicine, that does this a lot, that I really learned and understood this process. So I know that it can be learned. I know that by reading and by engaging in the process, this is something that is definitely learnable. And I encourage all of you to kind of take on that responsibility to learn it, and also for a center like Beckman to create some sort of educational program to hopefully teach some of you about the process of this. But to be a good innovator, you really have to learn. So my first action item to you is to get educated, increase your knowledge and training on the process. And one thing you could do is actually visit your institution's innovation or tech transfer office. When I was preparing this talk, I actually Googled and tried to see if UC Irvine has such a place. And there is actually innovation transfer operations website and also a center, I believe it calls Beals Innovation Center, where a lot of this activities and educational programs exist that you could go and be part of, right? If you don't want to do that, there's also other resources online. Harvard iLab, which I'm giving you the website here, has a YouTube free channel where you could go and learn a lot about different aspects of innovation. For example, what is IP? They have a whole 1.5-hour lecture on intellectual property. Why is that important? When do you need to do that? And they have many different lectures about different aspects of the innovation pathway. There's also this really good book, which I highly recommend for anyone who's interested in technology development, especially devices or diagnostic technologies. This biodesign textbook is written by Stanford professors, and it's an actual course that, again, teaches everyone about the process, which is to identify, invent, and implement. These are the steps that you really have to know to be a good innovator and to engage in innovation. Now, there are other learning resources that I've put together for you here that you could, again, access. Technology transfer textbook is free through the iBooks. If you go into your iPhone and go to iBooks, you could put the name and it comes up, and there's some really important and interesting chapters on the process of technology transfer, patent application, commercialization, and how to start a company if you're somebody in academia. There's also really good free resource through the Y Incubator. Y Incubator has a startup school that you could enroll and take for free on your own time. It's an 8-week online course, and it's very informative. So these are all resources that you yourself can use to learn more about the process. Again, it's really important to learn the process if you want to participate. Another action item you could do is really start a seminar series. I mean, this is something we did at Mass General 2 years ago. We started a seminar series for anyone in healthcare who wants to understand innovation process. It was called Demystifying Innovation. We bring people from all over the hospital together, either in person or virtually, and we cover important topics on innovation. So here I've listed some of the speakers that we've invited to speak about these various topics that are important for understanding the innovation process and pathway. And you could invite people to come and talk about these topics for an hour and pick their brain, and it's really fun. You also help build like an ecosystem of like-minded people who want to be together to learn this. And we found this to be really informative, educational, and useful for our healthcare workers at Mass General. Now, every organization wants to innovate, right? But doing it successfully is not easy. And this HBR article tries to explain why it's been so hard to be innovative. And they point out that most companies are missing key ingredients, which is why they're not able to successfully launch and sustain innovative programs in their institutions. I highly recommend reading this article, but I'm going to try to summarize it for you guys, what the key points are. First of all, what you need to have a successful innovation program is you need some sort of structured program that trains and rewards those who are going to participate, okay? And number two, you need to have a diversity in people and their skill set who are involved in this process, right? Innovation is a team sport. And you need to have a diverse team in place to do this successfully. This article really focuses on understanding the 4 different innovation styles, which they say are essential, and they need to be present and represented in any organization for innovation to succeed. If there's a lack of diversity in the styles, or if there's gaps, then that stifles innovation. So what are those 4 styles? So they go on to summarize this in their article. They categorize these 4 styles as generators. So these are the people who find new problems and they ideate based on their own direct experience. So in my opinion, clinicians would fit perfectly in this generator category because they're the ones who are dealing with all the problems related to patient care. Anyone actually coming into contact with patient would fit into this generator category. So I know that in Beckman, most of you are researchers. So this highlights the need for you to really bring together at the table clinicians or problem generators. These are people who have direct contact with patients for you to be successful if you want to launch your own program. The second category is conceptualizers. So these are people who will then thoroughly define and understand the problems and maybe come up with some strategies of how this problem could be tackled. Third category is optimizers. So these are people who would evaluate and maybe do some testing of suggested strategies and select the solutions that work best. And then the fourth is implementers, and these are people who will put solutions into work. So again, for any center to be successful in innovation, they need to have a team of people that fall into all of these categories. Okay, if you're missing one, it's not going to work. And we've seen this also with our own experience with the Magic Wand program, which I will tell you more. And this is actually my favorite quote from this article, which says, but perhaps the most important factor in finding innovation is a change in mindset. Rather than viewing problems as negative obstacles, leaders can help employees see problems as opportunities for innovation. So this is a very powerful statement, and I want you to kind of sit back and think about this, because almost all of us have been trained and taught to avoid problems, right? Especially if you're busy in clinic, you don't have time to stop and pay attention to problems, and you're not rewarded for that. So in my opinion, the most important factor for promoting innovation is to really change this mindset of avoiding problems and ask your employees to see problems as opportunities. And this is exactly what we did when we launched our Magic Wand initiative, and which is why I think it's been successful. The program was actually launched in 2013 as an academic initiative designed by myself and Rox to solve medical problems by innovation. And our goal and mission was to empower and educate clinicians to become leaders in innovation around the world, right? And we launched this program by showing up to Massachusetts General Hospital Department of Dermatology faculty meeting and passing out this 3D printed Magic Wand that looked exactly like this. This is actually one of them that I took a photo of to share with you. It says Derm Magic on it. And no, these ones don't have magical power, and they were really a gimmick that we used to remind clinicians to carry this in their white coat pocket and encourage them to use it whenever they came across a problem that they felt passionate about, or they felt that there should be a better way of doing this. We asked them to just stop and take out their magic wands and use it to capture the problem. And this is really why we named this program Magic Wand, because we told them to use this magic wand to capture problems that they felt passionate about, but also, as I will come to you later, we asked them to create a spec sheet. If you had a magic wand, what criteria would you want this problem to have in its solution? Like, what criteria should the solution satisfy for you to be happy with that solution? The one important thing that I want to mention here, that we told them to capture any problem that they felt passionate about. They didn't have to have a clue about how to solve it, which was also a way to sort of allow them to see beyond just the problems that they felt they had solutions for. It kind of empowered them to feel like they could bring any problem that they saw was a big problem or they felt passionate about solving. And we asked them to just bring facts about the problems to present in a brainstorming session we were organizing 2 months from the day we launched this. We didn't want any solutions. We just wanted them to come and present the facts about the problem, like who, what, why, why has this problem existed and why the current solutions don't work. So then, this ended up being a really big successful program that I will tell you some of the results for. But my next sort of advice for strategy for you is to create some sort of structured program similar to Magic Wand that brings innovation to the department and to the center. So when we created this program, we took this to our department, right? What we did is we redesigned the innovation pathway such that the first 3 steps are with clinicians only, because our focus was really to engage more clinicians in this process. So we said, okay, let's start with what clinicians are good at, which is identifying the unmet need, articulating the need, screening the need, and then creating what we call the spec sheet, which is what I just said. So those 3 steps were done with clinicians only within our department over wine and cheese. And our clinicians loved this, right? Because that was something that they felt comfortable doing. The barrier was low for entry and engagement. And actually, when we did this the first time, they loved it so much, nobody wanted to go home. It was like 10 o'clock and they were still there talking about some of the problems that they have brought and discussing it and really being engaged in this process. After that, then you kind of bring in the other players, like the tools and know-how that's needed to team up with the clinician to work on that problem. And we actually published a paper summarizing this whole process, and I encourage you to read it because it goes into more detail about how this program was designed and launched. But out of the 30 problems that they brought to that first brainstorming session, 8 of them are actively led by clinicians, which has led to measurable success. We actually published a paper 2 years ago highlighting some of those successes, which included a device that is being used in clinic now to objectively diagnose cellulitis, a device that's being used in Africa for diagnosis of Kaposi sarcoma, and also a startup company which was then eventually acquired. So this method works and actually does encourage, empower, and engage clinicians. And there's nothing, and I know that we did all this in dermatology. Then the reason for that is because myself and Dr. Rox Anderson were both dermatologists, but this can be applied to any specialty, right? It doesn't have to be dermatology because it's really a process and framework that you could take and take it to surgery or another department. And to prove that we actually did that this year, we expanded the Magic Wand program within MGH to other departments. And again, we created a structured process that engages a community of clinicians in problem identification and problem solving. And if you're interested in making such a program within your institution, I will share with you some of the lessons learned, but the number one important lesson is that you really have to reduce the barrier to entry if you want busy clinicians to engage in this. and you have to reward the participants, which is what that HBR article also stated. There has to be some sort of reward for people to put in their time and effort. And you have to make it simple, right? Like nobody has time to write like a 10-page proposal for a project that majority of the time does not get funded. So in this process, what we did is we asked clinicians from all these different departments to collect and define and articulate the unmet need in a brainstorming session that we helped them organize. Rox and I moderated along with everybody from that department. Throughout that session, everybody just presented 5 minutes, facts of the problem they brought. Then the entire department got to sort of vet the list and select the top 3 problems that they truly feel are worth solving and put forward for funding. So this process that we used recently, we actually awarded them with some money also to go on to work on those problems. What we did is once like the department put forward 2 to 3 projects to be considered for funding, we selected 1 or 2 per department that we were going to fund. And those that were selected were asked to create a pitch deck, 10-minute presentation on the problem worth solving, which they were going to present to researchers and engineers at the Wellman Center. So we have a Wellman Noon research seminar. We helped the clinician create this pitch deck. We helped them come to this seminar and present it. And at the end, kind of end their presentation with what we call a spec sheet, right? If they had a magic wand, what design criteria they want the solution to have. And after this seminar, I mean, the research faculty, the engineers were so excited like to see and hear about what the clinical problems are, because as researchers, they don't have the opportunity to go to clinic. They don't have the opportunity to walk in the hospital and see and know what are the unmet needs, even if they might have a technology that can effectively be used to solve those, right? So this is where I guess the power of this program is that it connects clinicians and scientists in a way that they could play their best roles. So we teamed up the clinician with the engineer and the researcher who had the tools and know-how to work collaboratively as a team. And we gave them funding to do some proof of concept studies and see if this is a project worth moving forward. So again, this is the process. You have to have some sort of structured process for this to work. We also highlighted, we gave about 80 to 120,000 per project. The project proposal was only 1 to 2 pages, again, lowering the barrier for entry. And it was really successful in getting a lot of clinicians and departments to participate. And we articulated the goals with every department. Like really our hope was to engage clinicians to come up with solutions and technologies to empower them to stay engaged and work collaboratively with our research faculty. And we hope that this would serve as an antidote to burnout and ultimately improve patient care, which is something that we all care about in academic institutions. So these are some of the clinicians that we awarded from the different departments. These are examples of projects we funded. We gave away $1 million, which Rox had received as a donation from a really grateful patient. And we wanted to share that with these clinicians to work on problems that they had identified in their clinical care. So every single clinician listed here is now working with research faculty to find solutions to these problems. Okay, so I'm going to move forward. I know we don't have that much time left, but we ended up making the virtual version of this program because people outside of Harvard wanted to sort of participate. So I co-founded and launched this virtual program in 2017. which engages dermatologists from all over US in this 10-month virtual curriculum. It's once a month for 1 to 2 hours where we engage dermatologists in the process of problem identification and problem articulation. And also we give didactic lectures for them to sort of learn more about innovation pathway. And the program has been successful. We've graduated 56 clinicians coming from 32 institutions. This year, we have 22 more clinicians that are enrolled in the program. This resonates well with many, many clinicians because they want to not only help patients, but do some creative work in problem solving and improving healthcare. And this virtual program has also been successful, and we published a paper this year actually outlining some of the measurable outcomes that we've achieved. Just to mention few, so these were 2 residents that were in the virtual program who, after finishing the program, teamed up, started a startup company called Veradermics because they wanted to solve the unmet need of creating a pain-free treatment for warts. Right now, we have liquid nitrogen, which is really painful for kids and most can't tolerate. And they wanted to change that, and they actually raised $20.7 million last year to do this successfully, and we're really proud of them. And the other person is Dr. Aditi Sharma, who was a resident at UC Irvine. She was in our 2020 class. Now she's faculty there. She said to us that she used what she had learned from our program to bring together a team of engineers and other experts during COVID to create this masks and PPAs during COVID when there was a huge shortage of it. She actually then donated this to homeless shelters and gave it to clinicians and received a lot of awards for this. So this again highlights the power of empowering, encouraging, and engaging clinicians to learn the process and use it to help patients. I think everyone benefits it when we do it well. So because of the success of the US program, we were actually asked to launch this also in Europe, which we did, and it was very successful. And our Magic Wand program and myself have been asked to do a lot of workshops and present in many national and international conferences because of the impact it has had. Now I'm going to just briefly end with strategy number 3, which is that you need to connect and create collaborations with experts that have the tools and know-how. So as I said, clinicians are really busy and science is rapidly changing. So even if they're good at knowing what the problems are and articulating the unmet need and making a spec sheet, they don't have access to then tools and know-how to create solutions and test those solutions, right? So that's where they need the researchers, the engineers, the people who are at Beckman to help them in creating and executing the next steps. So doing a pitch seminar similar to what we did at Wellman would be a great method of doing that. And also hackathons have been pretty successful in achieving that. And lastly, and I've mentioned this throughout my talk, is like you have to reduce the barrier to entry and create some dedicated fund for people who are involved in this to be rewarded. And I'm not saying this to pay them, but I'm saying this to have some sort of dedicated funding. So when they go through this whole process and they make a team, they have something now that they could use to do some proof of concept studies, to see if this project is viable, to see if they could come up with something to move forward with, or even apply for larger grants or opportunities. So the incentive has to be there. And now I'm going to end by saying that there's also things that you could do at an individual level to become a better innovator. I highly encourage you to read this book. It's called The Innovator's DNA. It was written by Clayton Christensen along with other faculty from Harvard Business School that highlights 4 behavioral skills that all of us could practice every day to become innovative thinker. And that's questioning, observing, experimenting, and networking. I wish I had more time to give you more explanation of what those are, but please read the book and you will understand. And this is my last slide, in that I'm going to end by saying that it's really essential that we lead and engage in innovation. And I know there's barriers, but they can be overcome by education, by creating a structured program, and by rewarding those who participate in creating collaborations between the clinicians and the researchers. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, and hopefully we have time for questions.
Thank you, Lilit. That was fantastic. Very much appreciate that. Questions, please. Anyone?
Hi, Lilit. My name is Matthew Hansen. I'm Director of New Ventures here at Beal Applied Innovation. And I was curious, as you talked about innovation in your early slides, and how there's more ways to innovate than just on the product or the technology. And I just want to acknowledge another resource, which is Doblin's 10 types of innovation. And he goes through 10 types, right? Not just the technology, but the relationships, the channel delivery, your partners, your resources, et cetera, and shows concrete examples from all different industries on how to innovate in ways other than just in the technology. So I want to thank you for making that point, because I think it's critical, particularly when you start launching companies.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, there's a lot of resources out there. I wrote it down. I'm going to look it up. I appreciate you sharing that as well.
Other questions or comments?
If I can ask one more or make one more.
Yeah.
Also, in your early part of your talk, you mentioned the role that clinicians can play in giving input, because they're also the end user. Can you talk a little bit more about how your process engages the voice of the customer, if you will? How does that steer any research that eventually gets to the point of having a proof of concept?
Yeah, really, really good question. I'm glad you asked that, because I think that's a point that's sometimes overlooked. So for example, when we launched this in Department of Anesthesia, right, one of the clinicians said he wants to have a holder on the ultrasound through which he could put the needle, such that each time he could use the same holder that guides the needle to a place where he needs to be. So we connected him with somebody from Wellman who has a 3D printer, was interested in helping and working with him on this. And the first time, the researcher printed something and said, oh, this is it, like this solves your problem. It goes on every ultrasound handpiece and you could put the needle next to it. But in reality, when he took that and he took it to the clinic where he needs to use it, right, which is the pre-op area, it just didn't work the way he intended it to work. So he came back and said, look, this is too bulky, or this didn't hold the needle in the orientation that I wanted. It wasn't turning. So there was a lot of input that he provided to this researcher and engineer to change, iterate, and prototype device in such a way that it really makes sense for clinical use, right? I think that input is critical, right? Because as a technology developer or as a researcher or engineer, you might create something that's so great, but yet it doesn't fit in the busy clinic of, let's say, a dermatologist for them to be able to use it, right? So then they're never going to use it, even if it works great. So to have that back and forth between the end user of the technology and how it fits, what the cost should be for them to be able to use it, what are other barriers, institutional, maybe like the cost of making that probe is so much that MGH will never pay to buy that, right? So all that input that we as physicians take granted is really important for creating a successful product, because ultimately it needs to succeed in the market and it needs to be viable and be used effectively in clinic for people to buy it. So I think that's where the clinical input is really important and valuable.
Thank you. I appreciate the example.
Mhm.
Thank
I mean,
you.
yeah, no, I'm just going to say that I think you guys have an amazing research center. I mean, Beckman Institute is known worldwide, right? You just have to kind of create a program where you could make that connection with the clinical faculty within different departments, implement a structured program where those clinicians could come and present the problems to your faculty in such a way that then your faculty would want to engage, right? I mean, not every faculty is going to have the tools and know-how, but you'll be surprised how many engineers or research faculty get so excited about the problem and start thinking about what they have in their toolkit that they could use to work with this clinician. I think it creates really fun process of team building, collaboration, where you bring them to play their best roles. And in my opinion, I think there's no greater satisfaction than being involved in creating a technology, a product or service or something that you can then see being used to help a patient. And that creates, this sort of cycle of excitement that more and more people want to be involved and be part of it.
I have a question. So early on, you talked about the 4 types of innovators that every organization needs, which were generators, conceptualizers, optimizers, and implementers.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that oftentimes, clinicians are great for the in the generator category.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, with some of the other categories, are there cross sections with, say, engineers? Are engineers usually good optimizers, or scientists? Where do these sort of different types of professional expertise, how do they fall into those 4 categories? How do they intersect with those 4 categories generally?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In this HBS article, they don't obviously talk about scientists or clinicians. They talk about more sort of the categories within a business or within a corporation, like the leaders, the managers, and so on. But I was able to sort of apply it to clinicians and scientists. In my opinion, I mean, I think the generators are the clinicians because they're the ones who find the problems. Because if it's in healthcare, right? Like, because they're seeing the problems every day related to healthcare. So they would be good generators. Now, they're also good at defining the problem. So I think conceptualizers could also fit into that category with clinicians, but they're not that good in sort of designing experiments or proof of concept studies to test some solutions, let's say, right? Like, so that part, I feel like as optimizers, engineers and researchers would be better fit. Engineers and researchers would also fall into this conceptualizer category too, because they're really good at thinking about sort of how to test some of those strategies or some of those solutions in a way that makes sense. And then coming back to implementers, I think that's where clinicians again come back in, right? Like, so the clinician involvement, I see it as really high at the beginning, and then it scoops down, and then really high at the end. And the researchers is vice versa, right? Like, so that's why they sort of complement each other. I think clinicians are good at implementing solutions that are made because of the fact that they're end users. So if, let's say, you make a prototype, they will take that and test it in a study and say, hey, this is what worked, this is what didn't work. Can you iterate and change this prototype to be a better fit for what I'm looking for? So it's really nice to read this article because I saw so many parallels and similarities to what we do with the Magic Wand program. And I think that's been part of the reason why it's been so successful, is because we have people in all those categories.
Thank you.
Sure.
Additional questions for Lilit?
When you mention you incentivize them with funding, what levels, what amounts, and what's the source of those funds?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the one where we sort of expanded it and launched within MGH, so we had $1 million we gave away. We funded each project from 80 to 120K. It doesn't have to be that much, but from our experience, like to make some meaningful contribution and be able to sort of test some viable strategies, you need some full-time postdoc, or you need some sort of funds to buy some reagents or buy some device or whatever you need, right? And I think 80 to 120 range works. Now, if it's really early in problem definition, you could say, look, I'm going to give you $5,000 to find the really good problem, define it well, articulate it well, make a spec sheet, and then we'll, reevaluate. So you could make it in tranches too, like you don't have to sort of go to 80 and 120 range, but I just think it's really important to have funding available, because the worst thing you could do is get people excited, make the teams, and then say, okay, great, now go apply for NIH or go apply for DoD funding so you could do this. I mean, that just kind of kills the momentum. Give them something to do those initial steps. And if successful, they will then go on and get more funding, right? I think Innovation Office could play an important role in providing some of that funding. We got it through our development office because that was a donation. But both through development or through Innovation Office, you could find funds like that to kickstart the program.
Thank you.
But that's a good question, yeah.
Okay, we're at the top of the hour. Last chance for questions for Lilit. Okay, Lilit, thank you very much again. I
My
think it's a
pleasure.
great
Yeah.
talk.
Thank you, and feel free to email if you guys think of other questions. I'm happy to answer. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.